What's up everyone, I'm Zenith and today's video is a guide for arena players looking to get into paper Magic. Let's get to it. Alright, one of the first things you're going to want to do when getting to paper Magic is picking a format. In Arena, the two main constructed formats are going to be Standard and Historic. Historic is actually not a format in paper for a lot of different reasons that I won't get into, but the most popular constructed formats in paper are going to be Standard, Modern, and Legacy. There are other formats like Pauper, Pioneer, and Vintage, but those just aren't as widely supported. At the end of the day though, don't take my word for what is supported near you. You should call your local game stores and figure out which formats they're holding events for. That way, when you pick a format, you buy a deck, you're going to be able to play with people near you and you're going to have more fun more frequently. So that's my tip number one. Be sure to call your local game store and see which formats they actually support. All right, let's get on to tip number two, which is going to be consider your budget and look at the prices for the decks and see what really fits for you. At the end of the day, Standard is going to be the cheapest to get into no matter what, and then Modern is going to be the next most expensive, and then Legacy is honestly an order of magnitude more expensive than even Modern. So when we're looking at Standard decks, as of this recording, the cheapest decks are going to be Mono Red and Mono White aggro. And when I say cheapest, I also still mean competitive. Obviously, you can get really cheap decks that don't actually compete within the meta, but that's probably not going to be worth it for you. So if you want to stay competitive and you want to do it on a budget, Mono Red and Mono White aggro are going to be the way to go. They still clock in at $125, which again is not a price point that I would consider cheap for any hobby. At the top end of the spectrum for Standard decks, you have Sultai Control right now, which is clocking in at around $350. All right, let's take a look at Modern. So the most popular deck in Modern right now on MTG Goldfish is It Blitz, and that comes in at around $800. So we're already looking at a deck that is twice as expensive as the most expensive Standard deck. And to be honest, It Blitz is actually on the lower end of the budget spectrum for Modern. On the other end of the spectrum, we have decks like Jund, which are very expensive. It goes well over $1,000, and so the range in price for Modern decks can vary quite a bit. But like I said, It Blitz is on the lower end of the spectrum. You can definitely get cheaper than that, but in terms of competitive decks, $800 is pretty much where you're looking at in terms of the bottom of the price tiers. Let's take a look at Legacy. The most popular deck right now, according to MTG Goldfish, for Legacy is going to be the Is It Delver deck. Is It Delver, or Blue-Red Delver, clocks in at over $4,000. So like I said, quite literally an order of magnitude higher than the most popular deck in Modern. That's a huge jump, and no one's going to blame you if you're not going to be able to play Legacy right now because of the price point. That's a huge amount of money. Again, it's a really different game though. Once you get into Legacy, you get to play with a lot of cool old cards, and if that's what you're into, go for it, especially if they're playing Legacy near you. I'm fortunate enough to have a very active Legacy crowd in the local area, and as COVID starts kind of winding down and the restrictions start lifting, I look forward to going and play some Legacy with people. One more important thing to take into account is the fact that Standard is a rotating format, which means that it actually has a continuous investment you're going to have to make into that format over and over again. And that is why it is actually a cheaper format to get into. Eternal formats like Modern and Legacy, however, move a lot slower and they change a lot less, which means that the investments that you have to make into those formats after you've bought into them are a lot smaller. So that's another thing to take into account when you buy a $350 Sultai Control deck. There's no guarantee that that deck will actually be any good in a year after new sets come in and old sets rotate out. It probably won't even be viable at all in its current form. Whereas if you buy Is It Blitz, chances are a lot of those cards are going to be legal for a very long time in Modern. So you're going to have to change your deck and buy new cards a lot less frequently if you buy into an Eternal format. Alright, so you have a format picked out, which means that you might actually have a deck in mind, but if you want a recommendation for a deck to play when getting into a new format, I highly recommend something more simple and linear, something like Burn. If you're playing Modern or if you're playing Legacy, they both have good Burn decks. It's just going to keep things a little bit easier to manage, especially while you're learning all the ins and outs of a format. Because at the end of the day, you're not actually just learning your deck, you're learning about all of the other decks that are in the meta that are competitive. That way you can know how to respond to all the different threats and all the different answers that they have to your threats, things like that. It's a complicated game at the end of the day, and if you can keep things simple for yourself, you're going to learn a format much more easily, and you're going to ease your way into the format and ease your way into paper Magic and have a much smoother learning curve. Alright, so you have your format and your deck picked out. Now is the time for the exciting part, which is actually buying the cards and starting your collection. One thing to remember before buying your cards is that you actually need to have all 75 cards for your main deck and your sideboard. If you're playing best of one on Arena right now, unfortunately that's not really an option in paper. Best of three is how all paper events are played, and sideboards are going to be really important here. So you can't just buy the 60 and ignore the sideboard. You're going to need all 75 to stay competitive. With that in mind, when you're buying singles, the number one rule to follow is to not buy boosters. Boosters are the worst way to actually get a deck together for constructed Magic. What you should be doing is calling up your local game store, or going to your local game store is probably easier, seeing what they have in stock, buying what you can from them. Inevitably, they're not going to have all the cards you want unless your local game store is really massive. But chances are, again, they're not going to have everything you want. And then from there, you can go to the online retailers like Channel Fireball, Star City Games, or Card Kingdom. Those are the three I use primarily, and fill out the rest of the deck that you haven't bought from your local game store. Once you have all of those, your deck is complete and you're almost ready to start playing. All right, the last few things you're going to need to get into Paper Magic after buying your cards and finishing out your deck are the supplies. Not all supplies are required, but the one that definitely is required are the sleeves that you have to put your cards in. The most obvious reason for why you need sleeves when playing Paper Magic are going to be the double-faced cards. You might be familiar with them on Arena like Search for Azcanta. When you're playing Arena, it might not actually be obvious, but in Paper Magic, Search for Azcanta is actually a double-faced card, meaning that there is no traditional Magic the Gathering back on this card. It's just the enchantment on one side and it's the land on the other. So obviously, if you're playing Paper Magic, this has to be in a sleeve so that you can't see what the card is. When it comes to sleeves, you need to have them be completely opaque. I've traditionally used the Ultra Pro Eclipses once they came out, and a lot of people also like the Dragon Shields like these. When it comes to Dragon Shields though, you have to be a little bit careful. Unlike the Eclipses, not all of the colors that Dragon Shield provide are completely opaque on the back, especially the lighter colors. If you're getting a black Dragon Shield sleeve, those are going to be fine. But if you're getting something like a yellow, those might not be completely opaque in the back. That might not matter depending on how competitive and serious the events you're playing are in, but if you're looking to get into something like a competitive rules enforcement level event, which I'm going to get into in the next section, you're definitely going to need completely opaque backs. Again, this is a lighter colored sleeve, but if you're buying the Ultra Pro Eclipses, they're all completely opaque in the back, so they're a safe bet. The other thing you're going to need are going to be deck boxes, probably. I think they're just way more convenient to carry your cards in around. You could get a very simple deck box like this one, which is going to be the Ultimate Card Boulder. It's as bare bones as you can get. It's literally just a piece of plastic, and you can open it up into two different parts. There you go, and you put your cards in here, and that's it. I also like to actually have a little bit more protection on the outside, so you can see like so. And this little box actually also has a little container here, which lets me put little doohickeys like spin down die if I'm playing casual Magic, and dice for counters for keeping track of like +1/+1 counters or loyalty, things like that. It's nice to have because it makes things just a little bit easier to track while you're playing the game. Again, that's not something you had to do while you're playing Arena, so you might not be used to it, but once you start playing in paper, it's going to be something that you're going to want to have. In addition to that, tracking information is going to be one of the most important things that you're going to have to get used to in Paper Magic. When it comes to Arena, your life totals are tracked by the game. When you play Thoughtseize, you can actually see the opponent's hand, so you don't have to write anything down. But when you're playing Paper Magic, none of that is actually tracked for you. So getting a notepad or something like similar is going to be extremely valuable so that you can keep track of life totals and also take notes whenever you need to. Finally, I like to use a bag for carrying all my stuff around because I just listed a notepad, a deck box, a pen, and you might have some other things that you want to carry around, probably a bottle of water or something like that. So I like to carry things around in a backpack. You don't have to get anything specifically designed for Magic, but just having something to carry all your stuff around in would be nice. So yeah, those supplies should be all you need to complete the actual physical part of putting together a collection to play Magic. Alright, so you have your deck, you have your supplies, you have everything you could possibly want to start playing Magic in paper. It's time to get over to your local game store and throwing down some cardboard. Nothing's going to compare or be a substitute for just getting a lot of games in person. You're just going to get better at playing Magic in person if you do it a lot. But here are a few pointers and things that I'd like to highlight when you get into it. The first most important thing is just how the game is actually even played is slightly different. The rules are the same, but when you're casting a spell, you don't have a nice little arrow that you can drag from the card that you're casting to its target. You have to say all of that out loud. Verbalizing your intentions explicitly and clearly is going to be the most important thing when you're playing Magic in person. The other thing that isn't going to be handled in paper Magic is going to be triggers. Triggers, you have to announce all of them as they occur. An example of this would be Reclamation Sage. When it enters the battlefield, you have to announce the trigger and name the target to put it on the stack. Search for Azcanta is the same way. At the beginning of your upkeep, you have to remember to say Search for Azcanta trigger before you actually get the effect. If you blow past the upkeep and you just draw a card and put it into your hand, guess what? That's called a missed trigger. There's going to be some environments that are going to be more casual. Maybe you can just ask your opponent if you can go back and actually put that trigger on the stack instead of just blowing past it. Your opponent, if they're feeling nice or if it's really just a super casual event, they might just say yes and you'll get to have that effect. But if you're playing something more competitive or if your opponent isn't in a giving mood, and to be fair, they have no responsibility to be nice to you and to let you take your trigger back, they're just going to say no, and that's called a missed trigger. You just have to move on. It's fine. Everyone does it. Everyone has missed a trigger. I'm sure if someone says, oh no, I've never missed a trigger in my life, they're lying. They probably never even realized that they missed a trigger, but they definitely have. Don't feel so bad about it when it happens. Just learn from the experience. And as you keep playing more and more paper Magic, you're going to get better at it and you're going to miss a lot less triggers. Again, don't worry about it. It's totally okay. Finally, at the end of the day, the match will come to an end, and if you know you've lost for sure, I used to think it's totally okay to give a handshake. Now with COVID and everything, if you're comfortable with it, I still would offer the handshake, but if the opponent refuses, again, don't be offended. They're probably just trying to stay safe, which at the end of the day is actually the most important thing, staying safe and then having fun. That's going to be the most critical part of the experience, and I hope you all enjoy playing Magic in person with all the people at your local game store. I think it's still the best way to play Magic. I really look forward to going back and doing some of that myself. And with that, I hope you all found this video helpful and enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like and subscribe button. If you want to watch me play some Magic on Arena, you can follow me at twitch.tv/ZenithLive, and I hope to see you in another video.